Thanks for coming. There were lots of things that I could have talked about, but I'm going to speak about a particular pilot project that the Urban Freight Lab ran in Seattle last spring. Because I think it's a neat project in that it was an sort of deeply collaborative project. The sort of project came about not because the Urban Freight Lab wanted to do that project, but because our member partners really wanted the opportunity to test empirically some of their technologies on the ground, and we offered to help steward that. So it's a project we call a Microhub, which is really just a small distribution hub, closer to customers in a relatively dense urban environment. This is work that was really led by Shema, who was a student of mine at the time and now works at Amazon. And again, a collaboration between the Urban Freight Lab, which is something I started about a decade ago, and our member partners. So these other logos here are all from companies that are members of the Urban Freight Lab. So they pay fees to be part of and support that research, much like the Sustainable Road Freight Center. And all kind of were active participants in the project. So Coaster Cycles makes cargo bikes. We used some of their bicycles to test a delivery solution. Axle Hire is a logistics provider developing routing algorithms for cargo bikes specifically, and also mixed fleets, so highly mixed fleets for distribution, with vans as well as bikes. That's not something that most delivery solutions currently can handle. Reef is the largest owner of parking lots in North America. They have many sub-brands, but they claim to own a parking lot within, I think it's 2 miles of like 80% of American residents. So they're trying to figure out what to do with all of their property in the future as the transport system changes. And BrightDrop was recently, their organizational structure has changed. They were GM's electrification division. So they're making the GM cargo van, as well as the associated support software, and they have some electric assist delivery vehicles that are smaller. So a Microhub, as I mentioned, is in our we've defined that in various papers. Other people have as well, but really a small distribution hub. And in this case, distribution, not collection, but you can use them for collection, obviously, as well, to really enable that very last piece of the delivery to be in a sort of lower impact mode. At our hub, we had a pickup point at the hub, so encouraging walking to the Microhub as a low impact solution, cycling, small electric vehicles, and because the expectation that these are present sort of in residential neighborhoods or in neighborhoods where people are living and want cleaner air, less traffic congestion, more compatible with pedestrians and city life. So as we all know, delivery systems are sort of under pressure due to growth in online shopping. And one of the behaviors, how many of you have seen this picture before? Everyone in the United States has seen this picture, so good. In New York, there's simultaneously, there's a lot of traffic pressure. It's a very congested city. It's hard to access the island of Manhattan because it's just tunnels and bridges. It's very hard to bring vehicles in. They're talking about a congestion charge now. They just approved a $15 congestion charge to get into the city of New York. So they bring in sort of large vehicles, right? Because you pay a per vehicle fee, and they try to fill them up. And then they really use the sidewalk. This is the sidewalk, but they actually sometimes use the street space to sort of unload everything from the vehicle. And then you can see there's multiple people here, but they'll do deliveries, walking deliveries from these. And they don't typically park on the busiest streets. They'll typically park on side streets, but they'll come in and this is the plan. They'll park all day, serve these walking deliveries. So they're almost little mobile micro hubs. And New York City has recently launched, they had a call for proposals. They've already received those proposals, but to test some micro hubs in New York where they would actually provide, off-street space for this work to happen and enable this kind of delivery so that they weren't using street or sidewalk space, and presumably so that New York can price that more appropriately. We don't call them urban consolidation centers in the United States because that makes people terrified. So, our project, as I mentioned, really came out of the desire for our private sector partners to test and practically experiment with these solutions, and the opportunity to do so at small, like in practice, but at small scale, at a test basis. Hard for them to do and coordinate in doing so otherwise, right? To collaborate across those entities. But we quite purposely excluded the city from that because that would have slowed us down. And we can talk more about that if you'd like. But this is the city of Seattle in the great state of Washington, top northwest corner of the United States. So we have a very dense urban core. We did the hub just a little bit sort of northwest of that because it's more residential. It's quite sort of typically like 6 to 8 story buildings, mixed use, quite walkable. Lots of their demographic is quite heavy online consumers, and they're ordering food. So they're sort of quite young and active, but it's dense enough to make this kind of hub cost effective, or the idea was that there was. So this is the parking lot where we did it. Because it's sort of underutilized parking. Not that that's a bad thing, but the parking wasn't typically used. And so the landlord was happy to experiment with this alternative use. We did pay him for that space, comparable rate to what they'd make selling it for parking. And currently that building used to be a cafe. It's now like a dark store. And so they have power and Wi-Fi and things that you need to support the hub. So we did a number of things there. One was just a cargo bike delivery. As I mentioned, one of our partners was the producer of these bikes. They've evolved a bit since then. They're really experimenting with the format of that bike. They've gone with a tricycle. And they're based in Montana. They make the bikes there. And Bosch was also one of our partners who does the electrification for that. And this is the GM. They've evolved this. They now call it the Trace, the GM Trace, but it's electric assist, essentially a sort of more sophisticated dolly that moves by itself. So it's easier on the delivery person, but it's also much more trackable and traceable. So you put there's visibility about what's in there. The temperature is controllable. So they wanted to put that out and get that in use, experiment with that, revise their design. And our goals were, see if we could reduce the number of trucks that are required to serve these neighborhoods, measure sort of the impact on customer accessibility, what options do customers have that live in this neighborhood, and also, see, sort of manage inventory, so the goods themselves that were being delivered, but also the equipment for that. Concerns, they had a lot of concerns about security and about how this micro hub would be monitored and managed, which was something that I didn't realize was going to be a big priority for them. But if you have just an open parking lot and you have equipment in that open parking lot, it's quite hard to control. There's a fair bit of theft and vandalism in downtown Seattle, at least the perception of it. And yeah, power, how do we make sure we can power and manage and provide internet and power needs for all of the users. It's not that easy. Most parking lots do not have electrification, at least in North America. Most of them don't have accessible Wi-Fi or reliable Wi-Fi to like operate lockers. So someone has to provide that. Someone has to make sure that's maintained. So we had data from the status quo. So things, our partner Axle Hire delivers to that neighborhood now. So we have data about how the internal combustion engine vehicle kind of operates now, how many routes they are, how far they drive. And we can compare that to the cargo bike. So this is one of the ways in which we measure that. Some interesting, observations. The bike has to make many more tours than the ICE vehicle, which is probably intuitive, and delivers many fewer packages per route. But if you multiply these out, you can sort of see that they're comparable in terms of the total amount of sort of work that vehicle can do in a day. It's just that the bike does a bit more circular because they have to come back and pick up more goods more often. They have less storage capability. The bike, delivers slightly more packages per stop. The bike gets closer to the customers than the truck does, and we're doing much shorter routes with the bike, and the average journey time of the bike is much shorter. So I think I've sort of explained that with my language here. So the bike makes more tours, visits fewer homes per tour, but in the end of a workday, really can accomplish the same amount of delivery. So we calculate kind of the VMT, we call it VMT or VKT, vehicle miles traveled per package, and also CO2 emissions per package. And we're make sure to capture the stem distance, right? So if we are capturing for the ICE vehicle, the total cost of delivery from a regional warehouse, then we have to also include that stem distance for the e-bike, because it would be unfair to only look at the e-bike cost from the Microhub. So we include the stem travel distance from the regional warehouse into the Microhub. And our benefits really depend a lot on that, the stem distance. So this is VMT per package. So we're just looking at sort of drive distance, one of the measures that you might look at. And it depends sort of how many, if you replace a truck coming from a regional warehouse, making some deliveries and going home, if you just put one Microhub into that, you don't really do better, because you have, you still have this big stem distance that a truck is traveling, and you've carved off a little bit at the very end. But if you're able to share that across a larger number of hubs, right? So the idea isn't that we would build one Microhub, and that by building one Microhub and sort of replacing that little piece of the city, that we would do dramatically better. The real benefits come from a network of hubs. So you're going to have, a micro hub in, I don't know how many, 5, 10 neighborhoods. And you can have a delivery truck that visits 5 or 10 of those. And then you have delivery, from each of these micro hubs. So if we can build something that works at that scale, there's, obvious benefits in terms of vehicle miles, CO2. But in our experiment, our empirical data, we just have one hub. And so there's not a dramatic improvement. We improved the neighborhood. We've reduced CO2. That probably doesn't matter too much in that neighborhood, but we've reduced vehicle activity. We've improved access. We have had little impact on speed. But really the systemic CO2 benefits are going to come from a network of micro hubs and sharing that stem distance across a larger number of micro facilities. In terms of CO2 emissions, like, we do better every time because we've carved out something, but we do a lot better, again, if we can share, if we have a network of micro hubs that we're sharing that stem distance across. It's not all gone. The STEM vehicle, that's an internal combustion engine vehicle, so we still have CO2 emissions from this activity. In the state of Washington, we have essentially all of our power is generated from renewable sources. It's basically nuclear power, wind, and almost 80, I think it's like 86% is hydropower because we have great mountains and water. So the CO2 emissions profile is great when you use electricity in Washington. That's not necessarily true everywhere else. So, we were able to test this cargo bike delivery. I have lots of other data about, we had some lockers there. We looked at walking deliveries as well and who chose those and how far they walked from. But it provides a significant, opportunity to reduce neighborhood impacts, even if you do it once. At scale, you can have a much more significant impact on more regional measures like CO2 and total travel. A lot of cities sort of have come to us and said, oh, the city would like to make some kind of test like this. How did you get people to do it? And really, in our case, didn't take that on. I don't want to try to convince them. Our members, our private sector members wanted the opportunity to test it, and we did it without the city. So I think there is, is in the entrepreneurial space, right, a lot of activity in last mile delivery and a desire to experiment and to prove out their products. And we were able to provide a platform and an opportunity for them to do that. But I think that was the key to us being able to do it and do it relatively quickly. The complexity in this problem really comes from middle mile and how you handle that. And so that's an invitation for people to experiment and explore that. Just as an aside, the hardest things about this, one of the hardest thing about it was getting people to ride the bikes. And that was a surprise. In the US right now, there's really like a lack of policy around cargo bikes and where they're allowed to ride, how big they should be, how they should be permitted or not permitted. And there's a big fight happening in New York City about how long they should be. They've decided they shouldn't be more than 10 feet long, and that excludes the trailer version. So we're trying to provide some insight. We have another paper where we put cameras on the bikes and looked at how they behaved. That's been helpful to that, I hope. But those were happy to talk about those other learnings that are less kind of operational. So thank you. This is our fair city. If you haven't been to Seattle, you have to come visit because it's a beautiful place. Mm-hmm.
So what wasn't particularly clear, how many bikes were based at your Microhub? Because the business about the impact of the stem mileage is really about the ratio of vehicles to bikes rather than numbers of bikes.
We had 5 bicycles. Most of the time, at peak time, we had 4 riding at the same time. But some of those statistics. So, we did some days we only had 2 bikes running. And so that was over a 4-hour period. Some days we had 4 bikes running over that same period. So it varied a little bit, but we had 5 bicycles. We had 1 sort of extra. One of the other things we came across was like tire design. One of the bikes got a flat one day, and people were like, oh, what are we going to do when the bike gets a flat? And so they've developed, I don't know, Michelin has this new semi-rigid tire called the Tweel, which actually came out of, partly was, they've had that as a product for a while, but this is a new market that they see as an opportunity for that. But we had 4 bikes running.
Can I just, a supplementary question then so the number of micro hubs, again, is dependent on what you consider to be the range of your bicycle. Now, in Europe, finding somewhere to put a micro hub, like somewhere like London, is extremely difficult. So actually, you're rationed in your number of micro hubs. So how did you sort of experiment with the range? I know that the tour length, the maximum was 2 miles. I don't know how circular they were. Right. So if that's a 2 mile, the circumference, then what's that, like a 2/3 of a mile radius?
So whether that's big or small, I guess depends what part of the world you're from. Yeah, we did some simulations where we looked at, how far apart they would be, but there's also the economics of sort of how dense does your customer base need to be to match that sort of size of the bike route. It was easy to, but we were only delivering meal kits, those sort of, you buy a box and it's the ingredients for making a meal, but you still have to cook it yourself. And there was sufficient density for 4 bikes for 8 hours a day, some days. So they don't deliver the same number every day. But sufficient density in a 2-mile radius for them, just for that product. So I guess it, also depends what other density and demand there is in that neighborhood.
Very interesting answer. Just quick. So this was just one particular supplier doing this. Did they have I'm just interested in the relationship between the landowner and how this works. So it's a car park. Would it be returned to a car park in the evening? It wasn't a solid access, and they had presumably had a container on here to put the stuff. Yeah, this is the container that we put the stuff in. During that period, no. But it is interesting. So at the time, Reef, who owns like the 2 main car park places in Seattle, we paid them as much as they would expect to make through, which was kind of disappointing. But they, as a company, they had sort of a thrust in urban logistics that they were exploring. So they were looking at dark kitchens and dark stores. And it was during COVID, they were looking at like vaccination clinics and COVID testing. So they're really in a phase where they were trying to generate ideas for how they could use this space. But they got a huge amount of funding from like SoftBank, but that's all been pulled back. And they, I think, are not currently exploring.
So they charge you for the whole car park?
Yeah, right. Well, they charge the Department of Energy for the whole car park. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like very quick one, please.
We had some scooter chargers here, and they told us we should pay them to put their scooter chargers. Yeah.
If you had 4 bikes, does that mean you had more people, and did that increase costs relative to just
I think one of the ideas, right, with cargo bike delivery, at least where I live, is that the drivers are going to be cheaper than truck drivers.